I hope time travel doesn't exist. Now let me explain myself. There have been multiple depictions of time travel in science fiction, and even in real life. They all sound terrible. You might be asking, well, which specific one? Because there's multiple theories, but all of the theories that we've seen in movies usually boil down to three different theories: dynamic timelines, fixed timelines, and branch timelines. Let's start with dynamic timelines. Pioneered by American author Ray Bradbury and meteorologist Edward Lorenz. This is the theory that changing the past changes the future. Movies like Back to the Future, Butterfly Effect, and Edge of Tomorrow work under this concept. This is the one that we're all familiar with. The goods of having this type is that you can change drastic mistakes. For example, humanity creates a weapon that destroys the Earth. However, Jimmy creates a time machine, goes back in time, and stops the creation of the weapon, meaning that the Earth doesn't get destroyed. This does create paradoxes. If the weapon was never created, then Jimmy would have no reason to go back in time, meaning the weapon does get created. The only explanation to fix this is either the ripple effect hasn't taken effect, or Jimmy is a time remnant. If the ripple effect was to happen, then Jimmy would be erased. Think of Back to the Future as a reference. If Jimmy stays and is never erased, then Jimmy is a time remnant, a product of a timeline that no longer exists. Take Young Justice Season 2, for example. Bart Allen, the grandchild to the Flash, goes back in time to stop an alien invasion. Once he stops it, he's still there. What Jimmy did was undoubtedly good, and this can be used to correct horrific results. Any other situation would be terrible. Doing anything in the past, even moving a desk a couple of inches, would result in massive changes. New people, new countries, new events would be created, which means you would end up erasing billions of people and potentially replacing them with new ones. When you make that change, there is no undoing it. Those people, those events, are gone forever. If this was to exist, that means you could be erased because a time traveler made somebody late for work. Let's move on with our second theory, fixed timeline. Pioneered by mathematician Kurt Gödel and astrophysicist Igor Dmitrievich Novikov. This theory states that changes are impossible and that everything is set in stone. If time travel were to happen, it's because it's supposed to happen and is important for future events to unfold. Movies like Tenet, Interstellar, and 12 Monkeys operate under this theory. Let's go back to our example, but using this theory. The weapon is created that results in Earth's destruction. Jimmy uses the time machine to go back to stop it. As it turns out, Jimmy inadvertently created the weapon that destroyed the Earth. This raises a couple of questions. First, who came up with the idea of the weapon? Apparently, nobody. The idea doesn't have an origin. Jimmy got the idea after its creation, went back in time with that idea, and ended up giving that idea to the creators. There is also no changing the past. Everything was predetermined and supposed to happen. For positives, changes would be impossible. So whoever's alive and whatever events happens would be unaffected by time travel. However, this is easily the worst one out of the three. First off, there is no free will. Everything you do was predetermined by something. Also, who or what is that something? Who determined all of our fates and actions? Was it God, multiple gods, another being, or the universe? Let's go back to our scenario. What if the idea did have an origin? What if Vito, the creator of this timeline, created a situation where the Earth would inevitably blow up? Does this mean Vito makes the decision on how we live, how we die? This theory starts getting into existentialism and really starts screwing with your head, so we're going to move on. In short, this means that the accident that kills you wasn't really an accident. Vito wrote it to happen. Our final theory is the branch timeline theory, pioneered by physicist Hugh Everett III and British physicist David Deutsch. This is the idea that any changes to the timeline creates a different timeline where those changes occur, and the original timeline stays untouched. This became popular from the MCU, but other franchises like Terminator and movies like The Tomorrow War work under this concept. Using our example, Jimmy goes back in time to stop the creation of that weapon. When he does stop it, it creates a different timeline where Earth doesn't explode. The original timeline stays intact, meaning the Earth still explodes. But Jimmy created an Earth that is saved. How would any of this be possible? The law of conservation of matter and conservation of energy states that both matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed. Creating a different timeline means creating a different universe. An explanation for this can either be that those laws are wrong, or that there is an unlimited amount of matter and energy sitting in the sign lines waiting to be used. Also, when there are more and more timelines being created, it'll be hard to keep track of what the original timeline was, or who the original you even is. This is the best one out of all of them. Any changes made would not affect the main timeline, but the fact that you can create a different timeline means that your destiny is not determined. If there was an issue with an Earth in one universe, people can flee to the other Earth in another universe. The issue with this rule is not much time travel itself, but more of society. Imagine if our United States went to war with an alternate United States because our United States needs more oil. Yeah. If we got into contact with the Earth in a branch timeline, there would be countries going to war across the multiverse. There could be a mass multiversal war. The MCU actually covered this concept very well. In their reality, everyday decisions creates branching timelines, not just time travel. The show Loki has an organization called the TVA that would destroy branching timelines to preserve one singular timeline. Destroying a timeline meant the erasure of not just the Earth, but all of that universe's inhabitants. A purge of an infinite amount of creatures raises a lot of ethical concerns. Again, I hope time travel does not exist. With dynamic theory, you can change a bad thing from happening, but create permanent changes that can result in the erasure of millions. Fixed theory tells us that our doom is ultimately inevitable and you can't do anything about it. Then we have branch timelines that solves the problem of the first two, but brings the multiversal problems with it. If time travel turned out to be real, it better be branch timelines. The events of the world would remain untouched, but creating another timeline shows that we have free will. Thank you for watching. I know this video didn't have me put fictional factions against each other, but this does relate to science fiction, so it fits the channel. But until next time, see you guys later.